The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window. Her fingers traced the cool glass while she watched the gardeners tend to the roses below. These same roses had bloomed for decades, witnessing countless royal moments of joy and sorrow. Today they seemed to droop slightly, as if sensing the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the palace. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He had aged considerably in recent months, the weight of responsibility and recent developments etching new lines around his eyes. The man who had once been the carefree second prince now carried himself with the measured dignity of someone who understood that every action, every word would be scrutinized by millions. "The children are asking questions again," he said softly, settling into the armchair beside the window. Catherine turned to face him, her usually bright smile replaced by a look of deep contemplation. The morning light revealed the subtle changes in her appearance too. A certain fragility that hadn't been there before, yet somehow making her more beautiful, more human. "What did you tell them?" she asked, moving to sit on the arm of his chair. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke of their enduring connection despite everything they were facing. Their love story had begun in the halls of St. Andrew's University, where they were just William and Kate, two young people finding their way in the world. "I told them the truth, as much as they can understand," William replied, taking her hand, "that sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult decisions even when those decisions hurt the people they love most." The truth was something they had been grappling with for months. The decision hadn't come suddenly or easily. It had been building like storm clouds on a distant horizon, growing darker and more inevitable with each passing day. The pressure from the institution, the relentless media attention, and the growing realization that their vision for the future of the monarchy was fundamentally different from what was expected of them. Catherine remembered the exact moment when she knew things had to change. It was during a state dinner 3 months earlier. She had been seated between foreign dignitaries, smiling and making polite conversation while photographers captured every angle. The conversation had turned to climate change, and she had expressed her genuine concerns about the environmental crisis facing future generations. The next day, tabloids criticized her for being too political and overstepping her role. That night, she had found William in his study, staring at newspaper clippings spread across his desk. "When did we become prisoners of our own lives?" she had asked him. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications they weren't yet ready to fully acknowledge. The months that followed brought a series of small revelations that gradually built into an undeniable truth. During a visit to a children's hospital, a young patient had asked Catherine if she was happy. The innocent question, posed by a 7-year-old fighting cancer, had shattered something inside her. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she had answered that question. Honestly, with a yes, William's breaking point came during a private meeting with senior palace officials about their upcoming tour schedule. When he suggested modifying their approach to focus more on environmental and mental health initiatives, he was politely but firmly told that such changes would need to be carefully considered and approved through proper channels. He was 41 years old, had served his country faithfully for decades, yet he was still being treated like a child who needed permission to pursue his passions. That evening, they had taken a long walk through the private gardens of Kensington Palace, the same paths where William's mother, Diana, had once walked with her own troubled thoughts. As they passed the memorial garden planted in her honor, Catherine noticed William pause and touch one of the white roses. "She would have understood," he said quietly. "She knew what it felt like to be trapped by duty while your soul yearned for something else." The conversation that night had been the most honest they had shared in years. They talked about their dreams for their children, their hopes for making a real difference in the world, and their growing exhaustion with the constraints of royal life. They spoke of their love for each other and how that love had sustained them through countless challenges, but also how it deserved to be nurtured in an environment where they could be authentically themselves. "What if we could still serve, but on our own terms?" Catherine had asked as they sat on a bench overlooking the palace grounds. "What if we could use our platform to create real change without being bound by protocols that were written for a different era?" William had been quiet for a long time before responding. "It would mean giving up everything we've known, everything we've been prepared for our entire lives. But would we really be giving it up? Or would we be transforming it into something better? She had countered. Now, weeks later, they sat in their bedroom, facing the reality of what that transformation would require. The decision had been made, but the execution would be the most challenging thing they had ever undertaken. They had consulted lawyers, financial advisors, and trusted friends. They had agonized over every possible consequence and prepared for every potential outcome. The hardest part was knowing how their decision would affect others, the disappointment from the Queen, who had come to rely on them as the steady, dependable face of the modern monarchy. The confusion from the public, who had embraced them as the perfect royal couple. The uncertainty it would create for the institution itself. But they had also thought about the alternative, continuing to live lives that felt increasingly inauthentic, raising their children in an environment where duty always trumped personal fulfillment, and watching their own relationship slowly suffocate under the weight of expectation. "Are you ready?" William asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Catherine looked out the window one more time at the roses, at the palace that had been their home, at the life they were about to leave behind. Then she looked at the man beside her, the father of her children, her partner in everything that truly mattered. "With you, I'm ready for anything," she whispered. The phone call came at precisely 9 o'clock that Tuesday morning. King Charles answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the measured tone he had perfected over decades of difficult conversations. On the other end, William's voice was steady but strained, each word carefully chosen yet heavy with emotion. "Father, we need to talk," William began. "Catherine and I have made a decision that will affect the entire family." Charles set down his morning tea, the delicate china making a small clink against the saucer. He had been expecting this call for weeks, perhaps even months. The signs had been there for anyone willing to look closely enough. The way William's jaw tightened during formal events, the distant look in Catherine's eyes during public appearances, the subtle but noticeable changes in their body language. "I see," Charles replied, his voice betraying nothing of the storm brewing in his chest. "Should I expect you here this afternoon?" "Yes, sir. We'll be there at 2 o'clock. The line went quiet for a moment, both men understanding that this conversation would mark a turning point not just for their family, but for the monarchy itself. When Charles finally spoke again, his voice had softened slightly, the father emerging from behind the king. "William, whatever you and Catherine have decided, I want you to know that I love you both. That will never change." After ending the call, Charles stood in his study for several minutes, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who had navigated their own crises and challenges. He thought of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and how she had weathered the storms of changing times while keeping the institution steady. Now it was his turn to face a challenge that could reshape everything. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Catherine was having her own difficult conversation. She sat across from her private secretary, Amanda, who had been with her for 8 years and had become more than just an employee. She was a trusted friend and confidant. "I'm so sorry." "Amanda," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know this affects your life too, your career, everything you've worked for." Amanda reached across the desk and squeezed Catherine's hand. "Your Royal Highness, if I may speak freely, I've watched you struggle with this decision for months. I've seen you try to find ways to make it work within the current system. You've explored every possible alternative." Catherine nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "We tried so hard to find a middle ground. We proposed scaled-back duties, a focus on specific causes, even relocating outside London. But every suggestion was met with concerns about precedent and protocol." "May I ask what finally made you certain?" Amanda inquired gently. Catherine walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard where tourists gathered daily, hoping for a glimpse of royal life. "It was George, actually. Last week, he asked me why I always seemed sad when we came home from official events. He said he remembered when I used to laugh more, when my smiles were real instead of the ones I use for cameras." The weight of that innocent observation had hit Catherine like a physical blow. Her eldest son, barely 11 years old, had recognized something that adults around her had been too polite or too invested to acknowledge. She was slowly disappearing behind the role she was expected to play. "And William?" Amanda asked. "William has been carrying guilt about his mother for so long. He's been trying to honor her memory by being the perfect royal, but he's lost sight of what she actually would have wanted for him. Diana wanted him to be happy, to have a real life, to make choices based on love rather than obligation. The afternoon meeting at Clarence's house was unlike any royal family gathering in recent memory. Charles sat behind his desk, his official position as king evident in every detail of the room's arrangement. William and Catherine sat across from him holding hands, a small act of defiance against the formal atmosphere. "We've drafted a statement," William began, producing a document from his briefcase. "We wanted you to see it before it goes to the press office." Charles read silently, his expression revealing nothing. The statement was carefully worded, respectful but firm. It spoke of their deep love for the country and the royal family, their gratitude for the support they had received, and their desire to continue serving in a different capacity. Most importantly, it explained their decision as being motivated by their responsibility as parents to create an environment where their children could grow up with both duty and personal freedom. "You understand what this means," Charles said finally. "The media reaction will be intense. There will be accusations of selfishness, of abandoning duty." "We understand," Catherine replied, "but we also understand what staying would mean. We would become increasingly resentful, our marriage would suffer under the strain, and our children would grow up watching their parents slowly lose themselves." Charles stood and walked to the window, his back to them as he processed their words. When he turned around, his face showed the complex mix of emotions he was feeling: disappointment, concern, but also a grudging respect for their courage. "Your grandmother faced a similar choice," he said quietly. "But she chose duty over personal happiness. It shaped her entire life, and in many ways it shaped mine and yours." "We're not rejecting duty," William said earnestly. "We're redefining it. We want to serve, but as ourselves, not as symbols that other people can mold to fit their expectations." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering practical matters like security arrangements, financial independence, and the children's education. They discussed the timeline for the announcement and the logistics of their transition. Charles asked pointed questions about their long-term plans, their financial projections, and their strategy for maintaining their children's connection to their heritage. As the meeting drew to a close, Catherine made one final appeal. "Your Majesty, Charles, Dad, we're not running away from responsibility. We're running toward it. We want to use everything we've learned, all the connections we've made, to create positive change in the world. But we want to do it as William and Catherine, not as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge." Charles looked at his son and daughter-in-law, seeing not just the future king and queen consort, but two people who had grown into thoughtful, principled adults despite the extraordinary pressures they had faced. The pride he felt was complicated by the professional disappointment, but it was genuine nonetheless. "I will need time to process this fully," he said, "but I want you to know that while I may not agree with your decision, I respect the thoughtfulness behind it." As they prepared to leave, Charles embraced them both, not the formal kisses on the cheek that protocol demanded, but real, heartfelt hugs between family members facing an uncertain future together. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, both William and Catherine lost in their own thoughts. They had crossed a point of no return, but instead of feeling frightened, they felt something they hadn't experienced in years: hope. The hardest conversation of their lives began on a quiet Sunday evening in the sitting room of Kensington Palace. William and Catherine had spent hours preparing for this moment, discussing how to explain their decision to George, Charlotte, and Louis in a way that would help them understand without frightening them. George, now 11 and increasingly aware of his unique position in the world, sat on the sofa between his parents. Charlotte, 9 and sharp as a tack, curled up in William's lap, while 6-year-old Louis nestled against Catherine's side. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, creating the warm, intimate atmosphere they wanted for this pivotal conversation. "You know how we've talked about how our family is different from other families?" Catherine began gently, smoothing Louis's hair. "How Daddy and I have special jobs that sometimes take us away from home." The children nodded, their faces serious but trusting. They had grown up understanding that their lives were shaped by duties and obligations that their school friends didn't have. They had accepted it as simply part of who they were. "Well," William continued, Mummy and I have been doing a lot of thinking about what's best for our family. We've decided that we want to step back from some of our royal duties so we can spend more time together and have more normal lives. Charlotte's eyes widened. Does that mean we won't be princes and princess anymore? You'll always be who you are, Catherine assured her. Nothing can change that you're our children and part of the royal family, but it does mean that our lives are going to be different. George, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. Is it because of me? Because I don't want to be king? The question hit William like a physical blow. His eldest son had confided in him months earlier about his anxiety regarding his future role, the pressure he felt even at his young age. William gathered George into his arms, holding him close. This is not about you, George. This is about all of us choosing to live in a way that makes us happy and allows us to help people in the way we think is best. But what about when I grow up? George asked, his voice small. Will I still have to be king? William and Catherine exchanged a look. This was the conversation they had dreaded most. That's a long way away, sweetheart. And when the time comes, you'll have choices too. Being born into our family doesn't mean you can't decide how you want to live your life. Charlotte, ever practical, asked, Where will we live? Will we still go to our school? We're looking at options, Catherine explained. We might move to a house in the countryside where you can have more freedom to just be kids. You might change schools, but we'll make sure you're somewhere you'll be happy. Louis, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly looked up at Catherine with worried eyes. Will people still like us? The innocence of the question broke Catherine's heart. Some people might not understand our decision right away, she said honestly. They might be confused or even angry. But the people who truly care about us will support what makes us happy. Over the following weeks, the children's reactions revealed their individual personalities in poignant ways. George, despite his relief about his future, worried constantly about disappointing people. He asked thoughtful questions about duty and responsibility that showed wisdom beyond his years. Charlotte threw herself into research, reading everything she could find about families who had left royal life, determined to understand every aspect of their situation. Louis, the youngest, simply focused on the promise of more time with his parents and the possibility of having pets in their new home. The children's questions often caught their parents off guard. Will we still see Grandpa Charles? Can we still visit the palace? What about our cousins? Each query required careful consideration, honest answers balanced with age-appropriate reassurance. One evening, George found William in the garden sitting on the bench where Diana's memorial roses bloomed. The boy sat beside his father in companionable silence before speaking. Daddy, do you think Grandmama Diana would understand? William put his arm around his son, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I think she would understand completely. She always wanted me to be happy, to have the chance to make my own choices. Will you miss being a prince? William considered the question carefully. I'll miss some parts of it. I'll miss the opportunity to meet interesting people and visit amazing places. But I won't miss feeling like I can't be myself. Meanwhile, Catherine was having her own meaningful conversations with Charlotte, who had always been remarkably perceptive about emotions and relationships. Mummy, are you scared? Charlotte asked one night as Catherine tucked her into bed. Yes, sweetheart, I am a little scared, Catherine admitted. Making big changes is always scary, even when you know they're right. But you and Daddy will take care of us? Always. No matter what happens, no matter where we live or what we do, Daddy and I will always take care of you and love you. The family began making small changes to prepare for their new life. They started spending more time at Anmer Hall, their country home in Norfolk, where the children could experience more freedom and privacy. They had family dinners without the pressure of official schedules. They took walks through the village, stopped at local shops, and slowly began to imagine what a more normal life might look like. During one of these visits, they encountered a group of local children playing football in the village green. After some encouragement from their parents, George, Charlotte, and Louis joined the game. Catherine watched from a distance as her children laughed and played without the careful supervision that usually accompanied their public interactions. "Look at them," she whispered to William. "When was the last time you saw them this carefree?" William smiled, but his expression was tinged with sadness. "I want this for them all the time. I want them to have friends who like them for who they are, not because they're royal." The most touching moment came when Louis, exhausted from playing, fell asleep in Catherine's arms as they sat on a bench watching the older children continue their game. A woman walking her dog stopped to chat, completely unaware of who they were, simply commenting on what a lovely family they seemed to be. "Just a normal family enjoying a beautiful evening," the woman said with a smile before continuing on her way. Catherine and William looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. This was what they wanted, to be seen as people first, parents first, partners first. The titles and duties had their place, but they shouldn't define every moment of their lives. That night, after the children were asleep, William and Catherine sat in the kitchen of Anmer Hall, sharing a simple dinner and talking about their hopes for the future. The conversation was different from their usual discussions about schedules and obligations. They talked about dreams, about the kind of parents they wanted to be, about the work they felt called to do. "Do you think we're being selfish?" Catherine asked, voicing a fear that had been haunting her. "I think we're being honest," William replied, "and I think honesty, especially in our position, is one of the most generous things we can offer the world." As they prepared for the official announcement that would change everything, they took comfort in knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a united family, finally free to be authentically themselves. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather itself sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. In the press office at Buckingham Palace, senior communications staff worked with unusual intensity, preparing for what they knew would be one of the most significant royal announcements in decades. Sarah Mitchell, the palace's head of communications, had been in her role for 15 years, navigating everything from royal births to scandals. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. She read through the statement one final time, knowing that these carefully chosen words would reshape public perception of the monarchy forever. The statement was scheduled for release at exactly 12 p.m. At 11:45, major news outlets received an urgent advisory. Buckingham Palace to release significant statement regarding their Royal Highnesses the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge at noon. Within minutes, breaking news alerts began flashing across television screens worldwide. At Kensington Palace, William and Catherine sat in William's study, watching the clock tick toward noon. They had decided to remain at home during the immediate aftermath, wanting to be present for their children when the news broke. The three young royals were at school, blissfully unaware that their lives were about to change irrevocably. "Are you ready?" William asked, his finger hovering over his phone, prepared to post their personal message on social media immediately after the palace statement went live. Catherine nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I keep thinking about all the people who believed in us, who supported us. I hope they understand." At precisely noon, the statement appeared on the royal family's official website and social media accounts. The words, crafted over weeks of careful consideration, began simply, "Their Royal Highnesses." The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge announced their decision to step back as senior members of the royal family and work to become financially independent, while continuing to fully support Her Majesty the Queen. Within seconds, the news was trending globally. Will and Kate, Jammy Royal exit, and Cambridge decision dominated social media platforms. News anchors interrupted regular programming, royal correspondents were rushed into studios, and the world watched in collective shock. The reaction was immediate and intense. At the BBC, veteran royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell was pulled from his lunch to provide expert analysis. His face, normally composed, showed the strain of processing this unprecedented development. "This is extraordinary," he told viewers. "We've never seen anything quite like this from such senior members of the royal family. The Duke of Cambridge is second in line to the throne, and together with the Duchess, they've been seen as the modern face of the monarchy." In living rooms across Britain, families gathered around television screens trying to understand what this meant for the institution they had grown up respecting. Margaret Thompson, an 82-year-old retired teacher from Yorkshire, spoke for many when she told her daughter. But they seemed so perfect together. They were supposed to be the future. However, the reaction wasn't uniformly negative. Social media revealed a surprising groundswell of support, particularly from younger demographics who admired the couple's courage to prioritize their family's well-being over institutional expectations. "Good for them," tweeted Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old teacher from Manchester. "They're showing their children that mental health and happiness matter more than duty to outdated systems." The international media coverage was even more dramatic. In the United States, where William and Catherine had always enjoyed enormous popularity, morning television shows canceled their planned programming to focus exclusively on the announcement. The couple's decision resonated particularly strongly with American audiences, who saw it as a bold assertion of personal freedom over institutional constraint. French newspapers drew comparisons to historical moments when members of royal families had chosen love and personal fulfillment over duty. Un choix courageux, a courageous choice, read the headline in Le Figaro, while Le Monde's analysis piece was titled The Modernization of Monarchy. At Buckingham Palace, King Charles spent the afternoon in emergency meetings with his private secretary, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Prime Minister. The conversations were tense, focused on damage control and managing the constitutional implications of losing such senior working royals. "This creates a significant gap in our ability to fulfill royal duties," explained Sir Edward Halifax, Charles's private secretary. The Duke and Duchess carried out over 400 engagements last year between them. But perhaps more concerning was the symbolic impact. William and Catherine had represented hope for the monarchy's future, embodying a modern, relatable version of royal service that appealed to younger generations. Their departure raised questions about the institution's ability to evolve with changing times. The most poignant reactions came from those who had worked closely with the couple. Staff members who had dedicated years to supporting their charitable work struggled with feelings of abandonment and uncertainty about their own futures. Some, however, expressed understanding and even admiration for the couple's decision. "They tried so hard to make it work within the system," confided one former aide who asked not to be named. "I watched them propose innovative approaches to royal duties, only to be told repeatedly that this isn't how we do things. At some point, you have to choose between your sanity and your sense of duty." In Norfolk, at the children's school, teachers and administrators worked quickly to manage the inevitable media attention and protect George, Charlotte, and Louis from immediate disruption. The school had experience dealing with royal children, but nothing on this scale. When the children arrived home that afternoon, they found their parents waiting in the sitting room with serious expressions and cups of tea. The news had already reached them through whispered conversations among classmates and the increased presence of security personnel. "Is it done?" George asked simply, showing a maturity that both broke and strengthened his parents' hearts. "Yes, sweetheart. The whole world knows now," Catherine replied, gathering all three children close. Charlotte, ever practical, wanted to know about the logistics. "When do we move? What happens to our rooms? Can we take our toys?" Louis, overwhelmed by the attention and change, simply buried his face in William's shoulder and asked, "Will everything be different now?" "Some things will be different," William admitted. "But the most important things, that we love each other, that we're a family, that we'll take care of each other, those things will never change." As evening fell, the family ordered pizza and watched a movie together, creating a bubble of normalcy amid the global storm swirling around their decision. Outside, photographers and reporters had gathered at the palace gates, but inside, the Cambridge family experienced something they hadn't felt in years: the peace of having made an authentic choice. The statement had included a request for privacy. During their transition period, though, everyone knew this would be largely ignored. The coming weeks would bring intense scrutiny, criticism, and speculation. But for now, in their sitting room, surrounded by familiar objects and each other's love, William and Catherine felt something approaching relief. They had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back now, only forward into an uncertain but chosen future. The weight of expectation that had pressed down on them for so long had finally been lifted, replaced by the lighter but no less significant burden of creating their own path. As they tucked their children into bed that night, each parent spent extra time in each room, answering questions, providing reassurance, and marveling at their children's resilience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, they were simply a family facing change together. The backlash began within hours of the announcement and reached a crescendo by the end of the first week. British tabloids, caught completely off guard by the decision, responded with a fury that surprised even the most seasoned royal watchers. The headlines were brutal. "Selfish," screamed The Sun, while the Daily Mail ran a front-page editorial titled "The Great Betrayal." William and Catherine had prepared themselves for criticism, but the intensity and personal nature of the attacks tested their resolve in ways they hadn't anticipated. Columnists questioned their character, their commitment, and their fitness as parents. Television pundits dissected every aspect of their decision, often with little regard for accuracy or fairness. The most painful criticism came from people they had considered allies. Lady Morrison, a longtime supporter of Catherine's charitable work, gave an interview expressing her profound disappointment in their decision. "I thought they understood the privilege and responsibility that comes with their position," she said, her words stinging more than any tabloid headline. But for every voice of condemnation, another emerged in support. The response revealed deep divisions in British society about the role of the monarchy, personal freedom, and the price of public service. Social media became a battlefield where Tinder support Will and Kate fought against royal duty, each side passionate in their convictions. Dr. Rebecca Phillips, a psychology professor at Cambridge University, found herself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight when her research on institutional pressure and mental health was cited in defense of the couple's decision. "What we're seeing," she explained in a television interview, "is two people who have recognized that their current situation was unsustainable for their well-being and that of their children. That takes enormous courage." The international reaction was more nuanced. European royal families, many of which had modernized significantly in recent decades, were notably silent in their official responses, though private conversations revealed sympathy for the couple's position. Queen Maxima of the Netherlands reportedly told a close friend, "They're doing what many of us have wished we could do." In Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, where William and Catherine had always been extremely popular, public opinion polls showed surprising support for their decision. Many Commonwealth citizens saw their choice as emblematic of modern values around work-life balance and personal fulfillment. The most unexpected support came from an unlikely source. Prince Harry, who had faced his own struggles with royal life, released a personal statement defending his brother and sister-in-law's decision. Having walked a similar path, he wrote, "I understand the impossible pressures they've faced. Their decision is not about abandoning duty, but about redefining what service looks like in the 21st century." For William and Catherine, the most difficult aspect wasn't the public criticism, but the private conversations with family members and close friends who felt betrayed by their decision. Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, struggled particularly with the implications for her grandchildren's futures. "I just want to understand," Carol said during a tense conversation at Kensington Palace. "You've worked so hard to build your reputation, to earn respect. Why throw it all away now?" Catherine, exhausted from defending their decision repeatedly, finally let her composure crack. "Because we were dying inside, Mum. Because our children were watching us become shells of ourselves. Because love and family have to mean more than duty and protocol." The conversation ended in tears and uncomfortable silence, a pattern that repeated itself in various forms with other family members and friends. Each interaction felt like another small loss, another relationship strained by their choice to prioritize their own well-being. William found solace in unexpected places. A letter from a single mother in Liverpool particularly moved him. "Your Royal Highness," she wrote, "I want to thank you for showing my children that it's okay to choose happiness over what other people expect of you. My son has been struggling with pressure to follow a career path that doesn't suit him, and your example has given him courage to pursue his dreams." Similar letters arrived daily, often from people who had never written to a royal before but felt compelled to express their support. Parents thanked them for modeling healthy decision-making for their children. Mental health advocates praised their willingness to prioritize psychological well-being. Young people expressed admiration for their courage to chart their own course. The couple began to realize that their decision had touched something deeper than royal protocol. It had opened a conversation about authenticity, mental health, and the courage to change course when life isn't working. This understanding didn't diminish the pain of the criticism, but it provided a sense of purpose that helped sustain them through the difficult weeks. The practical challenges were as demanding as the emotional ones. Security arrangements had to be completely restructured. Financial independence required careful planning and legal consultations. The children's education needed to be reconsidered, with new schools that could provide both excellent academics and greater privacy. Most challenging was the negotiation with Buckingham Palace about their future role. King Charles, while supportive of his son and daughter-in-law personally, had to balance family loyalty with institutional stability. Hours-long meetings addressed everything from their future use of royal titles to their security arrangements to their ability to continue certain charitable work. "We don't want to cause harm to the institution," William explained during one particularly difficult session. "But we also can't continue to sacrifice our family's well-being for appearances." The compromise that eventually emerged was complex and unprecedented. William and Catherine would retain their titles but step back from all official royal duties. They would be free to pursue independent charitable work and business ventures, but any activities would need to be approved to ensure they didn't conflict with royal interests. Most importantly for them, they would have the freedom to live primarily as private citizens, raising their children away from the constant scrutiny that had defined their lives for so long. As the initial media frenzy began to subside, replaced by other news cycles and controversies, William and Catherine started the practical work of building their new life. They purchased a property in the Cotswolds far from London, but close enough to maintain important relationships. The house came with enough land for the children to have the pets they had always wanted, and the freedom to explore outdoors without constant supervision. The transition wasn't smooth. There were days when the criticism felt overwhelming, when the loss of old friendships seemed too heavy to bear, when the uncertainty about their future created anxiety that kept them awake at night. But there were also moments of pure joy, watching their children play freely in their new garden, having dinner together without checking their phones for schedule updates, sleeping in on weekends without the pressure of official engagements. One evening, as they sat on their new terrace watching the sunset paint the countryside in golden hues, Catherine reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked William, who was reading while George and Charlotte played cricket nearby. William looked up from his book, watching Louis chase butterflies through the wildflowers they had planted together. "Not about the decision," he said, "though I regret how much pain it's caused others. I regret that we couldn't find a way to serve that didn't require us to sacrifice ourselves. But you think we did the right thing? Look at them." William gestured toward their children, who were laughing and playing with an abandon they had rarely shown in London. "Look at us. When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about schedules or protocols or what other people needed from us?" Catherine smiled, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine contentment. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to create. 6 months after their announcement, William and Catherine stood in the garden of their new home, watching their children help plant a vegetable garden. The scene was both ordinary and revolutionary. Members of the royal family with dirt under their fingernails, arguing good-naturedly about whether the tomatoes needed more space. The physical transformation of their lives had been dramatic, but the emotional journey had been even more profound. Free from the rigid schedules and constant scrutiny that had defined their existence, they were slowly rediscovering who they were beneath the royal roles they had inhabited for so long. Catherine had thrown herself into establishing the Catherine Foundation, an independent charitable organization focused on early childhood development and mental health. Without the constraints of royal protocol, she could speak more freely about issues she was passionate about and take positions that might have been considered too controversial for a working royal. "The difference is incredible," she explained to her new team during a planning meeting in their converted barn office. "I can actually advocate for policy changes instead of just highlighting problems. I can work with organizations that some might consider political. I can be effective instead of just symbolic." Her first major initiative was a comprehensive mental health program for new mothers. something she had wanted to develop for years but had been unable to pursue due to concerns about overstepping her role. The program included postpartum support groups, early intervention services, and advocacy for better healthcare policies. William had found his calling in environmental activism, establishing the Prince William Earth Foundation. He had decided to keep his title in his professional work, feeling it gave weight to his advocacy. His royal background opened doors, but his new freedom allowed him to push boundaries and challenge systems in ways that would have been impossible before. His first major project was a controversial documentary about climate change that didn't shy away from criticizing governments and corporations, including some with royal connections. "I can finally say what I really think," he told the film crew. "For years, I had to be diplomatic about issues that demanded urgency and honesty." The children had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience. George, initially worried about disappointing people, had blossomed in his new school where he was simply known as George Wales rather than Prince George. His teachers reported that he seemed more relaxed, more willing to take risks in his learning, and more engaged with his peers. Charlotte had embraced the freedom to pursue her interest without the weight of royal expectations. She joined the local drama club, took up horseback riding at a nearby stable, and made friends who invited her for sleepovers, something that would have been impossible in their previous life. Louis, youngest and most adaptable, simply reveled in the space and freedom their new life provided. He had convinced his parents to adopt 2 rescue dogs, which he cared for with the dedication of someone who had always longed for pets, but been denied them due to royal protocols. The most significant change, however, was in William and Catherine's relationship with each other. Free from the pressure of being the perfect royal couple, they had rediscovered the easy companionship and genuine affection that had first brought them together at university. "We're actually friends again," Catherine confided to her sister Pippa during a visit. "I had forgotten how much I enjoyed just talking to him about random things. For so long, our conversations were all about duties and schedules and managing public perception." Their new dynamic was evident in small moments throughout each day. They cooked together, took long walks without security details hovering nearby, and stayed up late reading or watching movies like any other couple. William had rediscovered his sense of humor, while Catherine had found her voice as an advocate and leader. The public reaction to their new life was mixed, but gradually shifting toward acceptance. Initial criticism about their abandonment of duty was tempered by growing recognition of the positive impact they were having through their independent work. Their foundations were making real differences in people's lives, and their ability to speak freely was bringing attention to important issues in ways their royal roles never could have. Turning point came when Catherine's foundation published a groundbreaking study on maternal mental health that influenced government policy. The research, conducted in partnership with leading universities, provided evidence that led to increased funding for postpartum support services. "This is exactly why we made the decision we did," Catherine told a reporter during a rare interview. "I couldn't have commissioned this research or advocated for these policy changes as a working royal. Now I can use my platform to create actual change instead of just raising awareness." William's environmental work was having similar impact. His foundation's report on corporate environmental responsibility named specific companies and their practices, something he never could have done while representing the crown. The report led to several major corporations changing their policies and prompted government investigations into environmental violations. The most unexpected development was the emergence of a new model for modern royalty. Other young royals in Europe were watching William and Catherine's experiment with interest, and some were beginning to adopt similar approaches, maintaining their titles and using their platforms while operating with greater independence and authenticity. Princess Leonor of Spain, Crown Princess Elizabeth of Belgium, and even some younger British royals were reportedly studying the Cambridge model as a possible template for their own futures. The idea that royal service could be redefined rather than rejected was gaining traction in royal circles across Europe. As their first year of independence drew to a close, William and Catherine hosted a small gathering to celebrate their achievements and reflect on their journey. The guest list included staff from their foundations, close friends who had supported their decision, and family members who had come to understand and respect their choice. King Charles attended, having gradually moved from disappointment to admiration for what his son and daughter-in-law had accomplished. "I may not have understood your decision initially," he told them privately, "but I cannot argue with the results. You're serving your country and your causes more effectively than many working royals." The evening was filled with laughter, substantive conversations about their work, and a sense of achievement that had been missing from many of their royal engagements. These people were there because they believed in William and Catherine's missions, not because protocol demanded their attendance. As the guests departed and they cleaned up together, William and Catherine reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. The formal dinner parties and state receptions of their royal life seemed like memories from another lifetime. "Do you miss any of it?" Catherine asked as they loaded the dishwasher, a task they had never performed during their years at Kensington Palace. "The travel," William admitted. "Meeting people from all walks of life, seeing different cultures and communities. But we can do that through our foundation work now, and it feels more meaningful because we're there to accomplish something specific, rather than just fulfill an obligation." "I miss the certainty sometimes," Catherine said. "Knowing exactly what was expected of us, having every decision made for us. This life requires us to make choices constantly, and sometimes that's exhausting. But look what we've built." William gestured around their kitchen, which displayed their children's artwork, photos from foundation work, and the comfortable clutter of a family that actually lived in their home. "This is real. This is ours." As they turned off the lights and headed upstairs to check on their sleeping children, both William and Catherine felt something that had been missing from their lives for years: genuine satisfaction with the path they had chosen. 2 years had passed since that gray Tuesday morning when William and Catherine announced their decision to step back from royal life. Now, on a brilliant spring afternoon, they stood before an audience of hundreds at the Global Mental Health Summit in Geneva, preparing to deliver the keynote address that would cement their reputation as independent advocates and changemakers. The transformation was remarkable. Catherine, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit, commanded the stage with a confidence that seemed to radiate from within. Beside her, William appeared more relaxed and authentic than he had during his years of formal royal duties. Together, they had become something neither had been able to achieve within the constraints of traditional royal service, genuine leaders in their own right. 2 years ago, we made what many considered a controversial decision, Catherine began, her voice clear and strong. We chose to redefine what service means to us and our family. Today, I want to share what that journey has taught us about authenticity, courage, and the power of choosing your own path. The audience was captivated. These weren't the carefully scripted remarks of working royals bound by protocol. This was raw, honest testimony from 2 people who had risked everything to live according to their values and had emerged stronger for it. William took the podium next, speaking about their environmental foundation's work with a passion that would have been impossible to express during his royal duties. "When you're free to speak your truth," he said, "when you can take stands that matter even if they're unpopular, when you can challenge systems instead of simply representing them, that's when real change becomes possible." The impact of their work had exceeded everyone's expectations, including their own. Catherine's foundation had revolutionized approaches to maternal mental health across 3 countries, leading to policy changes that were improving lives daily. William's environmental advocacy had contributed to corporate policy reforms and had influenced international climate agreements in ways his previous royal role never could have. But perhaps more importantly, they had become symbols of something many people yearned for: the courage to prioritize well-being over external expectations, authenticity over appearance, and personal values over institutional demands. The letters continued to pour in from around the world. A teenager in Japan wrote about finding the courage to pursue art instead of the business career her family expected. A middle-aged executive in Brazil described leaving his high-stress job to become a teacher, inspired by their example. A mother in Canada shared how their story had given her permission to prioritize her family's mental health over societal expectations. "You've shown us that it's possible to honor your responsibilities while still honoring yourself," wrote a university student from Scotland. Thank you for proving that duty and authenticity don't have to be mutually exclusive. Their children had thrived beyond their wildest hopes. George, now 13, was captain of his school's debate team and had developed a passion for environmental science that his parents encouraged, without the weight of royal expectation. Charlotte, 11, was excelling in drama and had written a short story about a princess who chose her own adventure rather than following the path laid out for her. Louis, 8, was simply a happy child who loved his dogs, his garden, and the freedom to explore the countryside around their home. The family had found rhythms and traditions that were entirely their own. Sunday morning walks in the nearby woods, cooking together every evening, reading aloud before bedtime, and summer camping trips where they pitched their own tents and cooked over campfires. These simple pleasures had replaced the formal traditions of royal life, and the children clearly preferred this version of their existence. The kids don't even remember being unhappy before, Catherine confided to William one evening, as they watched George teach Louis how to identify different bird calls. Sometimes I wonder if we waited too long to make the change. We made it when we were ready, William replied. And look at them now. They're confident, curious, kind children who know they're loved for who they are, not what they represent. The relationship with the royal family had gradually healed, though it remained complex. King Charles had privately expressed pride in their accomplishments, and there were rumors that he was considering reforms to allow working royals more independence in their advocacy work. Princess Anne had been particularly supportive, telling Catherine, "You've done what I always wished I had the courage to do." The public perception had shifted dramatically as well. What had initially been seen as an abandonment of duty was now widely viewed as a courageous redefinition of service. Opinion polls showed overwhelming support for their choice, with particular approval from younger generations who saw them as role models for authentic living. Media coverage had evolved too. Instead of focusing on protocol and appearance, journalists now wrote about the substance of their work and the impact of their advocacy. Their story had become less about royalty and more about human courage and the pursuit of meaningful life. The most poignant validation came from an unexpected source. Queen Elizabeth II, in one of her final interviews before her death, had been asked about William and Catherine's decision. Her response, carefully worded but unmistakably supportive, had surprised many. The monarchy must evolve to remain relevant. Sometimes that evolution requires individuals to make difficult choices that serve the greater good, even when those choices challenge tradition. As they concluded their presentation in Geneva, William and Catherine held hands, a simple gesture that symbolized their journey from constrained royals to authentic partners in both life and mission. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for their work or their presentation. It was recognition of their courage to choose love, authenticity and purpose over duty, obligation, and expectation. That evening, in their hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, they video-called their children, who were staying with Catherine's parents for the weekend. George showed them his latest art project, Charlotte performed a scene from her school play, and Louis introduced them to his newest rescue rabbit, which he had somehow convinced his grandparents to let him adopt. "When are you coming home?" Louis asked. And for the first time in their lives, both William and Catherine knew exactly what home meant. It wasn't a palace or an institution or a role they had inherited. Home was the life they had chosen to build together, the love they shared, and the authentic selves they had finally found the courage to become. "Tomorrow, sweetheart," Catherine promised. "We'll be home tomorrow." After ending the call, they sat quietly on their hotel balcony, looking out at the lake and the mountains beyond. Their journey had been painful, frightening, and uncertain, but it had led them to this moment, successful in work that mattered to them, united as a family and finally at peace with who they were. "Any regrets?" William asked, echoing the question Catherine had posed to him 2 years earlier in their Cotswolds garden. Catherine smiled, thinking of their children's laughter, their meaningful work, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on their own terms. "None whatsoever," she said. "This is exactly who we were meant to be." In choosing to leave the constraints of traditional royal life, William and Catherine had discovered something more valuable than titles or protocol or public approval. They had found themselves, their purpose, and a love that was finally free to grow without the weight of the world's expectations. Their quiet goodbye to royal duty had become a resounding hello to authentic life. and in that authenticity, they had found their true service to the world.